Madam President, I want to just close by saying a few words about our friend and trusted colleague, the senior senator from Mississippi, Thad Cochran, who's announced his retirement from the Senate. I know the real tributes are about to kick off in a minute when the majority leader will come out, but since I'm up here, I thought I'd just take the opportunity to say a few words. Senator Cochran has represented the state of Mississippi since 1978. That's in the Senate. He's one of the longest-serving members of Congress in the history of the United States. His career and his life speak for themselves. He is the son of a school principal and math teacher. He was, not surprisingly, a gifted high school athlete. He's also a piano player and a former college yell leader. And yes, even like me, he is a recovering lawyer. But we won't hold that against him. Before he joined Congress, he served in the United States Navy because he loves this country and the opportunities it has afforded him and his family. He is a man with a strong sense of duty and gratitude for the opportunities he's been given in life. After ROTC at the University of Mississippi, he received orders to join the USS Macon. And after that, he joined the staff of the Navy Commandant in New Orleans. Later, he ran for public office. He first served in the House of Representatives and then, of course, came here to the Senate, where he quickly established himself as a cordial but formidable presence. Before I came to the Senate, Senator Cochran was chairman of the Senate Republican Conference. He's chaired the Senate Agriculture Committee, too. And most recently, he's alternated between serving as ranking member and chairman of the all-powerful Appropriations Committee. Throughout his 45 years in Congress, he's participated in crafting and enacting historic legislation. But his main focus has always been on the people of Mississippi. His highest priority has always been on the men and women he was elected to represent in places like Jackson and Gulfport, Greenville, Starkville, and Hattiesburg. One example is when he fought so hard for recovery funding after Hurricane Katrina destroyed large swaths of the southern part of Mississippi. Many people forget that that awful storm was much bigger than New Orleans. Mississippi was hit almost equally as hard, and Senator Cochran made sure that his state got the help it needed to get back on their feet. His storied career is one of service and collegiality, even amidst all the fractious debates. He treats friends and political adversaries with respect. He listens to what people have to say. We need more people like that in public life. The majority leader has called him the quiet persuader, one who knows there's a big difference between making a fuss and making a difference. Judge Grady Jolly of the U.S. Court of Appeals, the Fifth Circuit, who's known Senator Cochran as long as anyone, says back home he's known for his modesty and his retiring nature, not attributes you would normally associate with somebody in politics, but he's a class act. Also, for the consistent attention he's paid to the Mississippi Delta, one of the poorest regions in the nation's poorest state. The judge calls Senator Cochran the ultimate model of sincerity, one who never engages in ad hominem or personal attacks and always keeps a sense of humor about himself. My office spoke to one Mississippi resident this week because we wanted to learn a little bit more about what Senator Cochran has meant to them. That woman, who had met Senator Cochran only a handful of times, said she had always respected and admired Senator Cochran's statesmanship and the dignity with which he represented Mississippi. Her comments are a good note to end on. Statesmanship and dignity, those traits never go out of style. So I know I speak for my other colleagues, and they will speak for themselves when we all say thank you to Thad Cochran for setting a higher standard for the members of this body. The United States Senate will not be the same without him. Madam President, I'd ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of H.R. 4851, which was received from the House.
The clerk will report. H.R. 4851, an act to establish the Kennedy King National Commemorative Site in the state of Indiana and for other purposes.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Young Amendment at the desk be agreed to, the bill as amended be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid on the table.
Without objection.
Madam President.
The senator from Tennessee.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to say a word about my friend Thad Cochran, who's retiring from the United States Senate. In 1968, I had the job of recruiting state chairman for Citizens for Nixon Agnew. I was a very young, wet behind the ears former legislative assistant to Senator Howard Baker. We were working in the Willard Hotel in the fall of 1968. The idea was to try to find outstanding citizens who weren't necessarily Republicans, because in the southern part of our country, there weren't a lot of Republicans, especially in the state of Mississippi. So I called around the state of Mississippi to find out who might be willing to head up this Nixon-Agnew campaign. Everybody I called said, well, there are two young men here who are just the most outstanding young men. Both are cheerleaders at Ole Miss, or have been, and both are going to grow up to be the governor of Mississippi, which was, at that time, I guess, the highest honor, the nicest thing you could say about some aspiring young man, because nobody thought the two United States senators, Eastland and Stennis, would ever retire. So growing up to be the governor of Mississippi was really a great compliment to a young man in Mississippi at the time. One of those young men was named Trent Lott. One of those young men was named Thad Cochran. I telephoned Thad Cochran, and I invited him to be chairman of the Citizens for Nixon Agnew. He was a Democrat, but he agreed to do that. We met in October of that year in Indianapolis. The mayor of Indianapolis then was Richard Lugar, a young mayor at that time, later a member of this body. And that was the beginning of Thad Cochran's Republican Party activity. Then he and that other young man who were so promising both ran for the United States Congress in 1972, and to the surprise of a great many people, they were elected the first Republican since Reconstruction, I suppose, from Mississippi, Thad Cochran and Trent Lott. And then in 1978, Thad Cochran did something that nobody had done from his state since the Reconstruction. He became a Republican who was elected to the United States Senate, and he's been here ever since. The reason he was able to be successful is not surprising. Thad was and is an engaging, pleasant person. His parents were educators. He learned to play the piano. He was a terrific baseball player, good enough to play professional baseball. He joined the Navy. He was in every respect the outstanding young man, just as he has been the distinguished public servant throughout his life. He's been widely respected here by his colleagues, elected to be chairman of the Republican Conference, and most recently he's been chairman of the Appropriations Committee, which is as important as any position in this body. In an era where not everybody seems to think it's important to act like a gentleman, Thad Cochran is a gentleman. And we respect that in the example that he has set. So he's been a pioneer for the Republican Party. He's been a good example for young people and for all of us, really, in terms of what we should expect and try to emulate in public life. And to me, he's been a great friend. So my wife, Honey, and I would like to say to him and to Kay, his wife, that we respect him, we look forward to the next chapter in his life, and we honor his service to this country.
Madam President.
Senator from Mississippi.
Madam President, I too wish to join my colleagues in tribute to our retiring statesman, Senator Thad Cochran. First of all, I have been asked by Phyllis J. Anderson, tribal chief of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians, to insert into the record a proclamation that was adopted only recently about Senator Cochran in appreciation for his 46 years of public service as a member of the House and of the Senate. And I ask unanimous consent that that proclamation be inserted into the record at this point.
Without objection.
I would note, and I thank you, Madam President, I would note that the last paragraph of this document says, resolved that I, Phyllis J. Anderson, by the authority vested in me as tribal chief, do hereby honor the legacy of the Honorable Thad Cochran and extend sincere gratitude, appreciation, and many blessings of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians to Senator Cochran upon his retirement after 5 decades of public service in the U.S. Navy, the U.S. House of Representatives, and the U.S. Senate, signed by Phyllis J. Anderson, tribal chief. Back in December of 1937, Thad Cochran was born in the little town of Pontotoc, Mississippi, population 1,832. He was born in the delivery room of the Rayburn Clinic, and some 13 and a half years later, Mr. President, I was born in the delivery room of the Rayburn Clinic in Pontotoc, Mississippi. Now, during a campaign some years later in 1994, when I was first trying to be a member of the House of Representatives, then Senator Thad Cochran and I went around the northern part of the state and told many people that he and I were born not only in the same town and not only in the same clinic, but born in the same room, the delivery room of the Rayburn Clinic. We thought that was the truth. Turns out we found out later from our moms that the Rayburn Clinic had moved down the street. And so while we were both born in the delivery room of the Rayburn Clinic, that clinic itself had moved. But it just points out how long Senator Thad Cochran and I have been friends, and how long our families have been friends, and how well associated we've been down through the years. Senator Alexander mentioned that campaign in 1968, and then he mentioned that he was a candidate for Congress successfully in 1972. I was honored as a college student to go door to door for Senator Cochran during that 1972 campaign. Yesterday was National Poetry Day. And so perhaps it's appropriate for me today to quote a couple of poets, the first being Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who said, "Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time." And as Thad Cochran departs the Senate in a few days, I think it's appropriate for us to reflect, as my friend from Tennessee and my friend from Texas have already done, and as others will do, about the great footprints that Senator Thad Cochran will have left in the sands of time for our nation. Because of Thad Cochran, our nation's defense is stronger today. Because of the efforts of our colleague from Mississippi, my senior senator, Americans are healthier today and will continue to be healthier. American agriculture is stronger today because of the efforts of this quiet persuader in the field of agriculture. And our economy as a whole is stronger because of the many efforts of Senator Thad Cochran and before him, Representative Thad Cochran in the United States House and in the United States Senate. So I'm just very grateful. We're all grateful for all he has done. Senator Cochran acknowledged in his statement about his impending retirement that health had become an issue for him, and it was time to move on. And although that was, I told reporters and I told members who asked me, I said it's a bittersweet moment. It's a poignant moment for me to hear such things. These sorts of things happen, and we all face health issues at some point. Alfred Lord Tennyson, in his magnificent poem Ulysses, said, "Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are." One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. So, Mr. President, I say to my friend Thad that we appreciate the fact that he has been strong in will. And though time and fate have happened to Thad Cochran and will happen to me and to all of us, what abides is the legacy that he's left of being a quiet persuader, of being a person of accomplishment, of being a gentleman who has made this country and its citizens better off. And I thank you, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
When I learned that our distinguished colleague from Mississippi would be retiring this month, I found it difficult to imagine the Senate without him. That's for good reason. Thad Cochran arrived here in 1978. 254 senators have since followed in his footsteps. Of those currently serving, 97 of us are newer at this than Thad is. And every single one of us has been treated to a first-rate example of honorable service. A master class in the art of legislation, and living proof that unwavering principle and unflappable collegiality can and should coexist. We all know Thad has a knack for making things look easy. So many graces and talents seem second nature to him. But appearances can be deceiving. Take the start of his political career. When you think about it, it's only natural that Senator Cochran liked to work on conservation issues. I expect his adventures as a Mississippi Republican in the early 1970s helped him understand just what it feels like to be an endangered species. In 1972, Thad was a rising star attorney when he was asked to try and become just the second GOP congressman from his state since Reconstruction. The possibility seemed so remote that when he asked Rose how she'd like being married to a congressman, she replied, "I don't know, which one?" Long odds indeed. But true to form, Thad won in the end, and again, and again. And then he became the first Republican senator from Mississippi in a century. It's safe to say service is in Thad's DNA. Both his parents were devoted educators. His father, W.H., served as superintendent of a large rural public school district. His mother, Emma, was a pioneering mathematics teacher who wrote new curricula. And in Pontata, Mississippi, their two boys grew up with a healthy appreciation for the power of good schooling. Thad graduated as high school valedictorian, then came a naval commission, and then law school, where he graduated at the top of his class. But no amount of success could take the kindness and courtesy out of this quintessentially Southern gentleman. A deep respect for others is Thad's calling card. Just a few weeks after he arrived in Washington, he brought his staff together, and here's what he said. We said, we're going to treat everyone the same. We're here to find answers for everyone, even if they disagree with us, and we're here to serve the people of Mississippi. Even at a time when the wounds of segregation were still raw, he made it clear this meant all Mississippians. In fact, he hired the first African-American congressional staffer to work in a Mississippi office since Reconstruction, Nehemiah Flowers. And for all his staff, Thad took the time to pen a detailed memo laying out high expectations for serving constituents and treating everyone with dignity. That temperament led to a litany of accomplishments. Mississippians knew that in Thad they had a quiet persuader, a steady workhorse, a dogged advocate who almost never made a fuss, but almost always made a difference. Indeed, the policy achievements of this mighty appropriations chairman are so numerous as to defy easy summary. I know this school teacher's son is particularly proud of his work on education. Senator Cochran carried the banner for research partnerships that raised the profile of historically black colleges and universities. He delivered critical funding to expand scholarship access. He spearheaded the Delta Education Initiative. He inspired the Cochran Fellows Program, which has changed the lives of more than 17,000 agriculture professionals from around the world. It's no exaggeration to say that Thad Cochran's work has broadened the horizons of millions. But it didn't stop there. There were the landmark bipartisan bills like the Cochran-Inouye National Missile Defense Act. There's his partnership with his dear friend Senator Leahy on the Farm to School program. The list just keeps growing. When he first ran for the Senate in 1978, Thad's stump speech included a line that Mississippians deserved a senator who would work full-time for them. They certainly got one. Thad didn't come to Washington to curry favor, win praise, or hog the limelight. When I say he preferred making a difference to making a fuss, I really mean it. This man served in the Senate for 7 terms and only appeared on Meet the Press twice. No, Thad had other business to attend to. He spent his 39 years in this body working full-time for students and educators, full-time for farmers and ranchers, full-time to deliver funding for our brave service members and our veterans who returned home. It is rare, even in the halls of government, to meet someone as influential as Senator Thad Cochran. It is even rarer to meet someone as kind, as even-tempered, and as concerned for the welfare of others. And it's almost unheard of that that same man would be both. That's just who Thad is. He wrote the book on composure under pressure. He served as the careful custodian of billions of taxpayer dollars without losing an ounce of humility. On the Senate floor and in committee, he tackled heated debates and complicated legislative challenges with true servant leadership. On the tennis court, by all accounts, he offered his colleagues a different and altogether less hospitable sort of service. But true to form, I hear Thad always combined winning and graciousness. He certainly had enough practice at both. From Pontotoc, Mississippi to the Senate floor, Thad Cochran's story has grown, but it hasn't changed. It's a story about putting others first. It's about doing the right thing every step of the way. It's a story that will continue to teach and inspire those of us who now must carry on our work without him. I know Thad's devoted staff are sorry to see him go. Their allegiance to him, famous throughout the Senate, is further testimony to his own principled professionalism. This is exemplified by nobody quite so well as Doris Wagley, Senator Cochran's personal secretary, who served Thad ever since 1973, when he was first sworn in as a congressman. She planned to take the job for just a year or so and then reassess. Enough said. She, along with all of Senator Cochran's excellent staff, have our admiration and our gratitude. I'd particularly like to thank two men who've led teams in service to Mississippi and Senator Cochran so well. Brad White, his chief of staff, and Bruce Evans, his longtime staff director on the Appropriations Committee. I'm grateful for their hard work on behalf of the Senate. I know the early mornings and late nights were many, including just these last few weeks. Thad's friends know that retirement will allow him more happy times with his wife, Kay, his beloved children, Clayton and Kate, and the 3 grandchildren he adores. He departs with our warmest wishes. We will miss our great persuader. We will miss our loyal friend. We stand with Mississippians and a grateful nation in honoring the service of Senator Thad Cochran.
Senator from Vermont.
President, I thank the distinguished majority leader and distinguished other senator from Mississippi for their comments. I often thought that Thad Cochran and I would serve here together straight through whatever time we have in the Senate, because he is such a dear friend. I often felt that Senator Thad Cochran was plucked from a central casting to fill the role of devoted public servant. More than most of us, he looks the part, but more than most of us, he embodies the best of what the Senate can be. Currently in this body, I've served longer here than anybody else. But I've never felt closer to a senator than I do to Thad Cochran, my dear friend. And our country needs more public servants like that. As Congress has become more partisan in recent years, Thad has stood by his values. He brings substance, not sound bites, to the upper chamber. His leadership, as has been said, as the quiet persuader, is going to be missed. He talked about him being a son of a school teacher. Well, it's no shock that he devoted his life to public service. Joined the Navy after graduating from Ole Miss, getting a law degree from the University of Mississippi, and then becoming engaged in Mississippi politics, often traveling with his father to help with voter registrations and campaigns around the state. He worked on campaigns from county sheriff to the governor's race. Then went to the House in 1972, getting here to Washington a couple of years ahead of me. And then we became Senate partners in 1978. He and I both became chairman of the Senate Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry. Today in the committee's hearing room, our official portraits hang together. It's easy to tell them apart. He's the one with the hair and the better looking. But I know Marcel and I have joined Thad in Mississippi. We visited sprawling cotton farms and fish farms. Twice Thad joined me in Vermont to visit small family dairy farmers. I even introduced him to my mother in Montpelier. Now, Mr. President, I have to make a confession here. I hope this doesn't go out of this room. But it was during one of those trips to Vermont, to St. Johnsbury, Vermont, 1985, and I had extolled the beauty of Vermont in the wintertime. And we arrived, and I think the southern gentleman was not ready for temperatures that dipped down to around 20 below zero. That's cold weather even by Vermont standards. But this wonderful southern gentleman turned to me and he said, "Pat, this is not Mississippi weather." And then made a few other suggestions what I was trying to do to him. But we had a wonderful visit just the same. And we stayed at what's called the Rabbit Inn with fireplaces going. And then the next day at our meetings, I think Vermont was ready to elect Thad Cochran as third senator. He was so impressive. But we also traveled beyond Vermont and Mississippi. We met with leaders around the world, the senior members of the Senate. We could go in a bipartisan way to see how they felt about the United States, answer their questions. And we and our wives became closer in these fact-finding visits. No matter how long the trip was, and some were onto the other side of the earth, Thad, through his conversation and his friendship, made even the longest trip seem short. But in our travels, one of the things I could always count on, Thad would always check in on the Cochran Fellows in whatever country we're in. That started in 1984, and the Cochran Fellowship Program has provided training for more than 17,500 people from 125 different countries to develop agriculture systems, strengthen trade between our countries, but also strengthen understanding between the United States and other countries. And he's leaving a legacy that's tied to our nation's agriculture development. When he was chair of the Agriculture Committee, he left his fingerprints on the Farm Bill, and they're still there today. More recently, we championed the reauthorization of the Farm to School program, providing federal resources to bring fresh, nutritious local food from local farmers to more than 40,000 schools across the country, including 83% of the schools in Vermont. What a legacy. He is the son of a teacher and a great advocate for Mississippi farmers. Thad knows how important this program is to strengthening local farm economies and educating young kids and their families about the importance of eating locally grown and nutritionally dense food. This picture was taken as we're visiting a farm, obviously not when it was 25 below zero. It was probably a warm summer day. That's why we have on light sweaters while we're doing it. But even though we're on the opposite ends of the political spectrum, Thad and I have crossed the aisle to work hand in hand for the American people, from our work in the Senate to our work, both of us as regents at the Smithsonian. But in every bill and program in which we've worked, he's been a senator with integrity, decency, civility, and most importantly, a dear and cherished friend. Thad will always keep his word. And I would tell that to the Senate because that's a quality that's becoming too rare sometimes in both parties. He is old school. Many of us would say the best school. And when I became vice chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee, I knew I'd have a steadfast partner in Senator Cochran. He's earned the moniker the quiet persuader. He was referred to by one of the members of the Appropriations Committee once, a moniker that should be appreciated as a workhorse, not a show horse. That's why he's been so successful, the quiet persuader. Well, the quiet persuader, when Hurricane Katrina struck, he was the quiet persuader who used his leadership to direct nearly $30 billion to communities on the Gulf Coast to rebuild. He'll leave this chamber having cast more than 13,000 votes and becoming the 10th longest serving senator in the history of our country. 10th longest serving in the history of our country. Constant champion of Mississippi, the American people. I don't think many people truly understand how much Senator Cochran has accomplished for his state and his country. Marcel and I count Thad and Kay among our dearest friends. His leadership on the Appropriations Committee and in the Senate will be sorely missed. Our country needs more devoted public service like Thad Cochran. I'm sad to see my dear friend leave. But I know his legacy as a presence will be felt in this chamber, in Mississippi, and across the country for generations to come. And I will enjoy looking at the photographs of my dear friend taken in Vermont, in Mississippi, and around the world. He is one of my heroes. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I too would like to start here by thanking my good friend, Senator Thad Cochran, for the tireless dedication and public service that he has brought forth here throughout some 40-something years, 45 years. Over 45 years ago, as has been said here, he was elected to the United States House of Representatives and elected to the U.S. Senate in '78. Thad, as all of us know, is a practicing attorney in Jackson, Mississippi, a graduate of the University of Mississippi, law school and undergraduate, and also studied abroad at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, where we visited one time. We've served together here in the U.S. Senate for over 30 years. He's been an excellent colleague, and I've been honored to work with him. We represent neighboring states, Mississippi and Alabama. We've both worked on some of the same priorities. But mainly, he served Mississippi with the utmost dignity and respect. He has an excellent staff. We're all grateful for their hard work and their help and their coordination with all of us. And as chairman of the Appropriations Committee, he's been a remarkable negotiator. And the majority leader will tell you, he's one himself, we need those traits at times. Thad has provided critical funding for various Mississippi priorities over the years. He hasn't forgotten where he's from. He's led the restoration of the Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina right here with a lot of help. His major priorities have always been, as I've understood them, defense of this nation, education that Senator Leahy talked about, agriculture, where he served as the chairman of the Ag Committee for a long time, rural issues, not only in Mississippi, but all over America. Thad's also spent many years serving on the Rules Committee that I now chair. But I believe history will reflect Thad Cochran's long legacy of strong leadership, and I believe myself that he's made an extraordinary impact here in the U.S. Senate. Thad, as we all know, is very courteous, well-mannered, has a low-key demeanor most of the time, you know. He's quiet, and he's patient, and he's built seniority through power and perseverance. Some people say that Thad Cochran is the last true Southern gentleman, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. Some people say that he represents the lost art of being nice, and we all need to work on that. He's always has been and will be a hero both here and back home in Mississippi. Thad, I wish you well, you and your wonderful wife, Kay, and I think all of us should strive to continue on the wise path that you've paved for us here in the Senate. I believe that we're all grateful, Mr. President, for his service to Mississippi and to our nation. We wish you Godspeed. Thank you.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have known and admired Thad Cochran for 40 years, since he first came to the Senate. At the time, I was a young staffer for Senator Bill Cohen, who also was elected to the Senate that same year. I saw from the start that this gentleman from Mississippi was so bright, insightful, and creative, and yet also humble, kind, and devoted to helping others. He treated everyone with such dignity. He was nice to everyone, from the elevator operators to the highest officials around the world. He truly is one who leads by example. Those qualities are his legacy, and I've seen them time and again as a member of the Senate Appropriations Committee when Thad was an important member, and of course when he became the chairman. Last year was the 150th anniversary of the creation of the Appropriations Committee, and Thad marked that occasion by reminding all of us of our great responsibility to make thoughtful and informed decisions in the allocation of public funds. In managing appropriations bills, he was always so inclusive, willing to incorporate ideas and priorities from everyone who could make a persuasive case. The fact is that Thad has always placed careful consideration and compromise above partisan politics. That really reflects how Thad has led his life. He has excelled at everything he has ever undertaken. When he joined the Boy Scouts, he became an Eagle Scout. In his high school, he was valedictorian. In college, he had the highest scholastic achievements. In serving in the Navy, he excelled. And of course, we know how much he has accomplished as our esteemed and dear colleague here in the Senate. When Thad served as chairman of the Appropriations Agricultural Subcommittee, he traveled to the state of Maine with me, and we met with Maine's potato farmers and blueberry growers, not exactly staple crops of Mississippi. But Thad listened so intently to these farmers and growers. And it was so clear that he cared about them, that he valued our family farms and our rural communities. That night, we had a lovely Maine lobster dinner at an inn on the coast. During that dinner, Thad shared with me his passion for good literature, his love of music, and his passion for education that had been instilled in him by his parents. Of course, another issue that brought Thad and me together was making sure that our naval fleet was strong. As a U.S. Navy veteran who served for a time in Boston, Massachusetts, Thad has always been a dedicated advocate for his shipyard in Mississippi, as I am for Bath Iron Works in the state of Maine. Thad has twice visited BIW with me to see the great work done there. And in 2013, Thad received the Navy's Distinguished Public Service Award in recognition of his longstanding commitment to American sea power. Through 4 decades in the Senate, plus 3 terms in the House of Representatives, Thad has compiled an admirable legislative record on issues ranging from education, libraries and the arts, our national defense, scientific and biomedical research, conservation initiatives, and civil rights. But perhaps his greatest legacy is he taught us how a senator should act. And that legacy will live on forever. That our nation is so grateful for your service, and I personally am so appreciative of your friendship. I offer my best wishes to you and to Kay. You will be greatly missed.
Mr. President.
Minority Leader.
I had the privilege to speak at some length about Thad in leaders' remarks, but I just wanted to add one point. I know my colleagues are waiting. Another trait of Thad's that made him so successful was he had a long memory and knew how to work the legislative process. So I remember after Katrina, with the devastation, Thad came over to me and talked to me about the needs for so much, including a rail line that was somewhat controversial in the southern part of his state. And he really convinced me that it was desperately needed, and I voted for it. Well, the wheel always turns. And 6 years later, we were devastated by Sandy. And we needed all the help we could get. I went to Thad. I didn't have to say a thing. He said, I remember what you did for me. I'm going to help you all the way with Sandy, and he did. It's just one of many great traits about this man and why he was so amazingly successful for the country and most of all for his beloved state of Mississippi. He made people want to help him and help his state, even though we don't have, as Susan says, the senator from Maine said, our states are so different, we wanted to help each other and we're bound by it. So Thad, you are a great man, a great example to all of us on how to conduct ourselves, and we will miss you here in the Senate, but wish you Godspeed, whatever else you do.
President Pro Tem.
I rise today to pay tribute to a longtime friend, a revered public servant, and a true Southern gentleman, Senator Thad Cochran. Thad Cochran will be retiring at the end of this month, bringing an end to more than 40 years of exemplary service to our nation, to Mississippi and our nation. Senator Cochran is a Mississippi man through and through. He was born in Pontotoc to a mother who was a school teacher and a father who was a principal. After graduating valedictorian of his high school, Thad attended Old Miss, where he earned both his bachelor's and Juris Doctor degrees. After serving in the Navy, he practiced private law in Mississippi for several years, but it wasn't long before he entered politics. After serving in the House of Representatives, Thad first came to the Senate in 1978, just 2 years after my own election. So the truth is, I hardly know this place without him, and I can hardly imagine what things will be like when Thad is no longer sitting here. It's difficult to describe the special bond you share with someone who has been your close friend and partner here on the floor and colleague for more than 4 decades. Thad and I have been here through some of the most formative events in modern history, including the fall of the Soviet Union, the rise of American hegemony, the creation of the internet, and the coming of the digital age. And as members of this body, we had the privilege not only to witness history, but also to help shape it. Whether as chairman of the Senate Republican Conference, the Agriculture Committee, or the Appropriations Committee, Senator Cochran has spearheaded some of the most significant policy initiatives of the last several decades. With an equal mix of healthy persistence and pure Southern charm, he quickly earned his reputation as, quote, the quiet persuader, unquote. I know I speak for all of my colleagues when I say he will be sorely missed. You see, Mr. President, Thad Cochran is so much more than the senior senator from Mississippi. He's so much more than the legislation he's passed and the titles he's held or the awards he's received. Thad Cochran is a fixture of American politics, a man synonymous with the Senate who embodies in every way all that is right and good about this body, a commitment to comedy, character, and respect. I think my colleague Senator Leahy put it best when he said that Senator Cochran represents the old school. He personifies a generation of lawmakers brought up on the principles of bipartisanship and compromise, and I believe that these very virtues have been the keys to his success as a legislator. Even in recent years, as our politics grew ever more divisive, Thad reminded us that in the era of endless gridlock and perpetual polarization, there is no alternative to civility and healthy debate. Thad was always someone you could trust to put the good of others above self, someone you could count on to reach across the aisle, even when the political risks were great. In so doing, Thad gave all of us a template for effective bipartisan legislating, and he followed the model for decades for the betterment of Mississippi and the nation. Mr. President, I consider myself lucky to know Thad, and even luckier to call him a friend. It's true that this body will not be the same without him, but I hope we can honor his service by recommitting ourselves to the virtues of civility and respect every day. Today, I want to thank my colleague from Mississippi for his example and his many years of friendship. I wish him and his family the very best. And Thad, I want you to know that not only will we miss you, we will not get along as well without you. Just think the world of you. It's been a pleasure for me to sit right by you on the floor for all these years, and it's been a pleasure to learn from you. So God bless you, and just know that a lot of us are pulling for you in every way. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Missouri.
Mr. President, everybody doesn't just come up with the same description of someone they work with every day by accident. When you think about everything that's been said, everyone independently sitting down, what do you remember about Senator Cochran? What do you think about when you think about Senator Cochran? He's a gentleman. He's a quiet persuader. He gets things done in a way that makes things that would otherwise seem hard for other people seem easy for him. A true groundbreaking politician, came to the Congress in 1972, but in 1978, he was the first Republican elected statewide in Mississippi in over 100 years. He gave evidence to that willingness to serve everybody in the direction he gave his staff. And nobody ever talks about Senator Cochran without talking about his staff. It doesn't take long into that conversation to talk about a staff that, just as Thad Cochran encouraged them to do on day one, always tried to solve everybody's problem they work for, no matter what that past relationship might have been or how they disagreed on other things. First time I got a chance to work with Senator Cochran, I was the chief deputy whip in the House, and we were in a leadership meeting trying to bring some things to a conclusion. And I think the majority leader in the Senate at the time was Thad's colleague from Mississippi. And Trent Lott turned to Thad and I was the junior person at the table. My mom and dad were dairy farmers. Maybe that's why Senator Lott thought I would understand this, but it was a dairy issue, as I recall, Thad. And he said, "Why don't you and Senator Cochran work this out?" Well, I think it was on something like the milk marketing orders, which almost nobody understood. It was a problem that nobody thought they could solve, and all I got to do, I'd been here about 25 months, Senator Cochran had been here 25 years. What I got to do was the great gift of watching him work that problem out, and it worked to a conclusion that, for whatever reason, everyone was happy with. And, you know, his leadership for states like Missouri and Mississippi with large rural populations. I think we have a bigger urban population than Mississippi, but we both have big rural populations, and whether it was agricultural issues or flood insurance or rural economic development, Thad Cochran was always there. At one time, not just being the chairman of the Agricultural Committee, but also the chairman of the Ag Appropriating Committee. And anybody who's worked around here very long knows it doesn't get much more powerful than that when it comes time to solve problems. Mentions of Hurricane Katrina and stepping up along with Haley Barbour, the governor of Mississippi, coming together, convincing the Congress of things that needed to be done and a few things that got done in Mississippi that didn't get done anywhere else. I had a chance, I was presiding this morning when Senator Schumer spoke, and he didn't mention it in his comments here a minute ago, but he mentioned it this morning, and an important view of both of them. He said that he remembered Thad saying one time, "I don't call a lot of press conferences. I don't think it's part of my responsibility." Senator Schumer quickly pointed out that was not his view of press conferences, but it was Thad's view of press conferences or meet the press or anything else that didn't focus on his job getting things done. The bill we'll vote on today does things for members of the active armed forces and veterans that we haven't done in a long time. It's a fitting conclusion to Thad Cochran, who in 2013 received the Navy Distinguished Public Service Award and was stationed in Boston for part of his service in the Navy, where nobody could understand what he said, but they wanted to do whatever it was that Thad Cochran wanted to do. Senator Shelby, I liked his term that Thad Cochran is one of the last practitioners of the lost art of being nice. The lost art of being nice. I talked to my 13-year-old son, Charlie, just this morning, and I said, "You know, Charlie, it's actually easier to be thoughtful than to be thoughtless." But so many of us don't mature much beyond the 13-year-old understanding of that. We'd be better off to watch and learn from what Thad Cochran did so well while he was here. You know, Thad and Kay will be missed in the daily Senate family, but they'll always be an important part of the Senate family. It's an exciting time when you get to go home to Mississippi and don't immediately understand that you very quickly have to turn around and come back to Washington to do what Thad did so well for so long, representing the people he worked for, the people he loved. At least two generations of Mississippians don't remember when Thad Cochran wasn't their senator. And only when this time in the Senate ends will people fully begin to realize how much he did, how much they appreciate what he did, and how much has happened because Thad Cochran was here.
Senator from Georgia.
Thad, it's an honor for me to come to the floor of the Senate and talk for a minute about my friend Thad Cochran. And I know everybody's probably said everything that needs to be said, that just everybody hadn't said it yet. But kind of in the vein of what Senator Blunt said, everybody says the same thing about Thad Cochran. He's gracious, he's smart, He's genteel. He's effective. He's a great colleague. I want to tell you about Thad Cochran. When I came to the Senate 14 years ago, I did what I've served in every legislative body I could be elected to living where I live. I've been in the Georgia House, the Georgia Senate, the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, all representative legislative bodies. And in each one of them, I got some advice my first year in the Georgia House 41 years ago that was real good advice. A good friend of mine said, Johnny, I tell you what you do. The first year you're down here, don't say a word. Just watch everybody talk, watch what everybody else does, look at the people you'd like to be like, and then for the remainder of your career, be like that person. Because in the end, this business is about relationships and effectiveness, not about bluster and bragging. And I did pick out a guy. His name was Carl Harrison. Carl's passed away now, but he became one of the best friends I ever had in life. And I watched him in the Georgia legislature, and I patterned my way after Carl Harrison. And the success I had was in large measure because I followed a great leader like Carl. When I got to the United States Senate, I knew I needed leadership. I needed to find a book or something to tell me how to be a good senator. But I remembered Carl, and I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to sit in this body. I've got 6 years in this term. Surely I can take a few months of the first year and kind of figure things out. And so I started watching, and you could see the characteristics and the quality of each individual in the Senate. And everybody offers unique gifts which they give to this body. But I kept watching Thad Cochran. He was respected, always had time for you, never let you know he'd been here a lot longer than you ever thought about being here, maybe longer than you've been born. Listened to you, and you asked him for a question, he gave you an answer. And so I called my wife and I said, sweetheart, when we come back to Washington next week, I want to take Thad Cochran to dinner because I've decided he's the guy I'd like to be most like. And I'm not making this up. This is exactly what happened. And so we went to Ocean Air, Thad. I don't know if you remember it that night. It was pretty crowded. It's pretty loud in Ocean Air. Thad's not a loud guy. But when Thad walks in a room, it gets a little bit quiet because everybody knows wisdom has arrived. My wife and I enjoyed that dinner tonight. We became great friends with Thad. We had a number of issues where we engaged each other over the course of the years, and on all of them, I think we're on the same side except catfish. I think I got a line on catfish, and I apologize for that, Thad. I know Roger's in here somewhere, and is that right, Roger? But I tried to redeem myself as best I could. But the highest compliment I can pay to anybody is I wanted to be just like Thad Cochran. And so in the 13 years since that dinner at Ocean Air, in everything I have done and tried to do in the Senate, I've tried to be like Thad Cochran. You know, Mark Twain once wrote, when confronted with a difficult decision, do what's right. You'll surprise a few, but you'll amaze the rest. Thad Cochran, when you have a tough decision to make, when somebody's got to cut through the chase, point you in the right direction, you get the job done, it's Thad Cochran that you want in the foxhole. He is the perfect example to me of a noble life and a noble leader. I have a favorite poem that's in a book called Leaves of Gold in the Methodist Church. And I think that poem applies to Thad Cochran better than any words I could come up with today. The poem goes something like, it says, I'd rather see a good person than hear about one any day. I'd rather have a good person walk with me than merely show the way. For my eyes are better pupils and more willing than my ear, and fine counsel is confusing, but example is always clear. And the best of all the people are the ones that live their creeds, for to see the good in action is what everybody needs. Well, I'll be very glad to do it if you'll let me see it done, but I can watch your hands in action and your tongue fast may run. But the lectures you deliver may be very wise and very true, but I'd rather get my lecture by observing what you do. For I may misunderstand you and the high advice you give, but I'll never misunderstand the way you act and the way you live. Thad, you've blessed us all by the way you act, by the way you live, by the example that you've set. May God bless you and your family. We wish you the best, and will you always come back? Because if you ever need me, I'll be right here for you. You've always been there for me. God bless you, Thad, and I yield back.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Mr. President, I want to thank the Senator from Georgia for those comments, and would like to associate myself with all of those. Fantastic. We should have saved him for the concluding speech, I think. That I want to rise today also to honor a man who spent the last 46 years faithfully serving the state of Mississippi in Congress. Thad, you're the longest currently serving member of Congress, and we're going to miss your experience and your leadership. You've left a mark on Congress that won't soon be forgotten. You've served with great distinction and have made a difference in the Senate. Your time in Washington began when the people of Mississippi voted to send you to the House of Representatives, and you represented their interests in that chamber from 1972 to 1978. Then you ran for and won an open Senate seat. Thad and I have found ourselves on two sides of the U.S. coin. He chairs the Appropriations Committee, I chair the Budget Committee. Even though he does the detail of spending the money and I work to set the parameters, I've always respected him and enjoyed working together. Former senators, too, have spoken highly of Senator Cochran. In fact, in 2007, while congratulating Thad on his 10,000th vote, our good friend, the late Senator Ted Kennedy, said, "Thad and I don't always agree on policy matters, and more often than not, we find ourselves on opposite sides of the issues. But those disagreements never diminish my respect for his thoughtfulness, and nor do they diminish the friendship I feel toward him." And I think that's a pretty common refrain for somebody who's quiet and effective and perseveres through everything. Thad's known to hold strong opinions, but that's never stopped him from developing a close working relationship with members of both parties. Throughout his career, he has used his experience and mastery of the issues to persuade his colleagues, but he's done so privately rather than bashing them in the media. This determined yet respectful approach to negotiations and his passion to find solutions to the problems and concerns of the people of Wyoming and America have led to his nickname of the Quiet Persuader. He's been a great mentor to me. Thad's had a remarkable career and his leadership will be dearly missed. He's inspired future leaders from his state, and in that way and so many others, he's made a difference. Diana joins me in sending our best wishes to you, to your wife Kay, and to the rest of your family, and our appreciation for your willingness to serve Mississippi and the nation so faithfully and so long. There are countless sayings about how politics isn't for anyone but the brave and the resilient. I think your experience, especially this past year, has shown that there is no challenge too large for you to overcome. And clearly you specialize in making the world a better place, and that's a win-win for us all, especially our children and our grandchildren. I'm sad to see you leave the Senate at the end of this month, but I wish you well-deserved retirement and other adventures. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Democratic Whip.
Mr. President, I rise today on this side of the aisle and to start thanking my friend, Senator Cochran. Yesterday I made a longer speech in the congressional record, but I didn't want this moment to go by without tributes from both sides of the aisle while you're personally present on the floor. My relationship with Senator Cochran was fortuitous. There used to be two giants of the Senate here, Ted Stevens and Danny Inouye, and forever and ever, they were the two people, Democrat and Republican, who were in charge of the Department of Defense appropriation bill. And we bowed to their knowledge and wisdom, and then the day came when they were both gone, and the new people stepping in were Thad Cochran and Dick Durbin. I felt totally undeserving to be given that kind of responsibility, and certainly would never follow that act of Danny Inouye, as great as he was in serving our country, both in the military and in the United States Senate. And Thad had the responsibility of following Ted Stevens as the Defense Committee chair. Well, we both knew that we were being held to high standards as people compared us, as they inevitably would. And the thing we decided to do from the beginning was to do it together, to learn on the job and to work together. It really harkens back to a Senate that I remember, and I'm sure Senator Shelby and others remember, when we first got here, when the Appropriations Committee assignments were really bipartisan assignments, start to finish. And my work on the Defense Subcommittee with Thad Cochran was bipartisan from the start, and always was. There was mutual respect. If I ever had an issue, I could go to him. He knew that the same thing was true. If there was an issue related to his concerns or the state of Mississippi, he could come to me.
We never, ever set out to trouble or embarrass one another publicly. We tried to always have a good, positive working relationship, and the very few disagreements we had were behind closed doors and usually resolved behind closed doors. It really was the Senate that I was elected to, and the one that I miss today. We need more of it. Thad Cochran, you made it easy when you were chairman of the Defense Committee for this ranking Democrat to be an active partner of yours in doing some important things. I think we accepted our responsibility and did our level best. I think our American national defense is stronger today because of it, and I'm lucky because I had a good friend and a good mentor and a good colleague by my side. I wish you the very best. And if you want a longer version of this speech, it was given in the record yesterday. So you can take it home and read it if you'd like. But I thank you again for being such a great senator and a great representative of your state of Mississippi and a great colleague when it came to our appropriations work.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The senator from Mississippi.
Mr. President, I am really kind of choked up about it.
The Senate is in a quorum call.
I suggest the absence of quorum.
Without objection, the senator has the floor.
I suggest that the quorum call be rescinded.
Objection.
Mr. President, I appreciate this opportunity. I suppose we could call it that. I don't come to the floor of the Senate unless it's a really important issue to Mississippi or to the nation. And I have always benefited from listening to someone who's talking with me or discussing with me an issue or making some remarks. And because I don't speak often on the floor of the Senate, I usually prepare some notes. My staff suggests some things that I might want to discuss, as I represent all of them in the United States Senate. I leave the Senate with a confidence because of this effort to live up to these expectations that our enduring Constitution guards our country from human error. It empowers our citizens to achieve greatness and to protect the common interests, military, domestic, reviewing with the President of nominations and seats of honor and responsibility in our departments, including number one, national defense. It's an opportunity to empower our citizens to join in the discussions at hearings. In these opportunities, our defense upon military empoweredness of our military is a beacon of freedom throughout the country and liberty for the world. And I'm optimistic about the future of our great nation. And in the United States Senate role that has been discharged and discussed here today, and I'm optimistic about the future success of our efforts to protect the security, to health, to the guarantees of the Bill of Rights of the United States. Every day, an issue comes to the U.S. Senate to consider, to discuss, and I am honored to have these remarks for the remainder of those we've prepared for the record. I'll ask unanimous consent that they be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President,